Tonight I'm going to do Monon lettering as it would appear on, in this case, a C420 locomotive, but on C628s, even on F3 locomotives, RS2s. And here I'm basically putting what would be a portion of the gold stripe where we can put where the gold stripe would go there, and then here I'm putting those faint lines that I always put for lettering. That's always very, very important. I can make them a little darker. We'll erase them off so that you can just kind of see them. And Monon has, as I've said before, on, like, for instance, the Wisconsin Southern letters, the lettering has a slant to it, and it's kind of the hardest to see maybe in the letter M, because the M and kind of there's a little bit of the slant sort of disappears where the middle of the M would have a slant anyways. But let's kind of just block out where the letters would go. There's the M, the O, the N, the O, and the N. The nice thing about practicing this is that we're not like totally fitting it, and the M should be a little wider than the rest of the letters. We're not totally trying to fit this like actually onto your drawing of a locomotive, which is very nice. Here, there should be a little bit of a kind of angle to this tail of the M. And that's why it's always good to practice a lot, is because when you're actually putting it on a locomotive, I mean, sometimes if it ends up going a little bit over one door over, that's okay. But part of what happens is sometimes when you're doing your lettering, then here's that slant. When you're doing your lettering, what happens is as I said, if it goes over a door, that's fine, but sometimes it runs into a grill, like GP9s, for instance, have those infamous grills on them, which you've maybe seen in some of my videos. And when you all of a sudden are writing something like Great Northern or Union Pacific, and all of a sudden you come up to those big grills on GP9s, that's where you really have wanted to practice your lettering, because, and how to manage it by blocking it out, because what ends up happening is the biggest thing that happens with lettering is as much as you plan ahead, you just start to kind of a little bit run out of room. It just naturally just kind of happens. Even after 30 years plus of doing it, you just kind of run out of room when you're lettering. It's just, now the O is at a slant, and part of what's going to happen in the word Monon, this is why this is a very good word to practice, is Monon is M-O-N-O-N. And this gives you practice, like this happens a lot in numbers on engines, is that numbers will repeat right next to themselves. And when two numbers repeat, or in this case, the O and the N and the O and the N, what happens is this is a good chance to kind of practice as much as you can, trying to make this O, see, that's why I'm erasing here, trying to just make this O, and don't be too hard on yourself, but you want that O to look like that O, and then this N to look like that N. See, I can see a little bit, which is fine, but I can just sort of feel in doing it that this end's going to be a little bit wider than that end, which is fine. There's no big deal if it's a little bit wider. And now it's a little bit narrower because, see, I was trying to compensate for it. I should have just let it go. But a lot of times just kind of following the way it was originally going to go is perfectly fine. Okay, there we go. There's the word Monon. And one thing that's very good with a lot of these alcohol-based pens is that you want to kind of erase the guidelines. There we go. Get that erased off. And this color is khaki. It's one of the Prisma colors. And it basically is for the gold of Monon. And what it's going to do is it's going to make it fairly challenging to see the lettering that you did, but you'll still be able to see it. And gold, where you're doing the lettering, is black lettering. And you can certainly, and then the engine above and below will be, I can spin it. And you can overspray as much as you want when the lettering and the engine are going to be black. But the one thing I recommend, even if you're overspraying, do flip your card, because what happens is when you're pulling from this side and then you're pulling from this side, where you start and where you finish, the ink is much more intense where you start towards where you finish. Now you probably can't see it. I can't even really see it. But what happens is that it gets much darker. Like if you did all three of your coats from one end versus one from one end and then one from the other end and then one back, it balances it out much more. Meanwhile, it's upside down. Okay, there we go. And I can imagine from where you are, you can might be a little challenging to see Monon. As quickly as I can, I'll get it. So, because I can almost barely see it. That's what happens when you put a color like, as I've said before, orange or these golds. Always have as good a lighting as you can when you work too. I probably don't have as good a lighting in here as I could. But see, when I start to put this ballpoint over it, the word Monon's probably coming out better. There's the M. Now the thing about elliptical O's is you don't really get to use the curved template quite as much. And these just take a lot of practice. That's one of several reasons why I recommend just practicing it again and again. There's the N. Now these letters, especially the way I'm doing them here, on the engine itself, it would probably be thin enough, but the way I'm doing it here, these letters are going to be thick enough that we're going to paint the insides of these letters with the brush of the black pen versus just doing it all in ballpoint. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go up the top with the ballpoint. See, ballpoint, like this gold doesn't have a very good trimming color, but what you do, because you oversprayed it, is you just trim it there with the black. And see, now the Monon's been trimmed out. And as I often say, why don't we just take a moment, just sort of pause, look at it, and just kind of, and it actually, you know, might not hurt to just, why don't we just paint? This is what it would be like if we were painting the engine. Paint the bottom, and see, we flip it, paint. This actually, doing an exercise like this is very good practice for what it would be like if you were actually painting a Monon engine. See, you got to apply the gold, now you're applying the black paint. And 2 coats I find is actually enough for black paint, because when you start to put 3 coats, it starts to a little bit wash out the detail. And now what I do is, I oftentimes, I just kind of like, just sort of eyeball. There's the M. There's the O. There's the N. This engine could be on its way from Chicago to Indianapolis, or headed down to Louisville. Might be carrying a carloads of steel from the steel mills, even along the Great Lakes. And what I'll do here is, often compared to just taking a brush, touching up, especially, it's always kind of nice to touch up a little bit. Now when this is wet, maybe don't totally get all over it with your hands. Just a little bit of touching up. And basically, it's pretty much ready. And there we go. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And it was great to paint the Monon name with you. And if you'd like to see more drawing demonstrations, please subscribe to Andy Fletcher Trains here on YouTube. Thanks.